All right. Good morning. It is good to have everyone here. We've got a lot of material in Daniel to cover, so we're going to go ahead and get going this morning. But it is certainly good to see everybody. If you are visiting with us, we are glad that you are here this morning. We are continuing our study in Daniel, and we've really just started, and so you haven't missed a whole lot. But we're going to get going on this pretty soon here. We'll give it just a minute for a few folks to sit down and quiet down, and then we'll say a word of prayer here as we begin our lesson. If you do want to turn in your Bibles to Daniel chapter 1, we're going to get into the text this morning and start diving into what we can see there. All right. Well, very good. Well, let's start our lesson here with a word of prayer. And then we'll dive right in here. We've got a lot of material to cover. So let's pray. Our Father in heaven, we are so grateful for you, Father, for your loving kindness, for your provision, and for your holy word, Lord, that we can open these pages, that we can see insights about you, that we can know how to please you, Father, and we can gain hope and confidence in the promises that you have made. And Father, we are so grateful for your love and for your kindness and for this hope and for the encouragement that it provides. Please bless us this morning. Bless all of us as we strive to worship you and draw our hearts closer to you. It's in your Son's name we pray. Amen. Okay, so the last two classes we have talked about a lot of the history of Daniel, and there is a lot of history in Daniel here, and it's kind of an interesting perspective too, right? Because you really need to know some of the history leading up to the time of Daniel, but also Daniel deals with prophetic visions into the future that are now the past for us. And so we can kind of hit both sides of this from a historical standpoint, and Jim has done a great job throughout this course in all of these materials pulling together the historical framework of it. There's another very interesting piece of Daniel, and that is that Daniel is not laid out chronologically within the text with how it is written, chapter by chapter. And in fact, if we dig right in on that, let me see if that works. There you go. You can see this timeline of Daniel, and you can see just kind of right in the middle of that slide, right above the Daniel line, that blue line, you can see how these chapters are laid out. And so they're not sequential, and so we're going to look at this a little bit today on, well, why are they written in the way that they are? And so there's a literary component to this. And so to really understand and appreciate Daniel, there's a historical side, there's a literary side, and maybe fortunately or unfortunately for you all, I am an expert in neither of those. So we're going to get through it the best that we can, and I still am blown away just at some of the depth that you can see, even just in this first chapter here. And so Daniel as a whole is a wonderful story, right? As Jim mentioned, just a quick recap, it is a piece of history of Israel where we see the southern kingdom being taken away first into captivity. This begins that 70-year period of captivity that we know Jeremiah prophesied about, and we see God's plan at work with that. We follow Daniel throughout all 12 of these chapters, and we learn a great deal about his character. And he is one who has integrity and deep faith for his entire life. It's an interesting story in that we see Daniel as a young man being taken into captivity and held in captivity for that full 70-year period. And so we really see his full life cycle and a consistent theme that shows his integrity and his deep faith in God, even despite some of the trials that he goes through. We see incredible stories of God's provision and protection. Think about the stories from this book that we teach our little kids in the little kids classes. Daniel's in the lion's den, the fiery furnace, the hand writing on the wall, right? The unique aspects of this book, some of these stories, they're just incredible stories about God's protection and his provision for those who remain faithful to him. We also see supernatural events, speaking about the hand on the wall, but we see angels, we see the king of Babylon being turned as if he was like a beast in the field. We see all of these kind of crazy things that we can't fully explain by just what we see here from a natural, worldly perspective. And in the backdrop of all of this, one of the central themes that leads up to this and is going to come out of this time period and these prophetic visions that Daniel receives is we see a world at conflict. You see these different empires, these superpowers rising up against each other and taking over power in this world dominance. And that's very important as we begin this, because one of those central messages, despite these worldly kingdoms and who is in control from a worldly perspective, is that, of course, God is in control and God is supreme. And so that is going to be a central message as we study this book and we look at who God is and what he does. And so all of this leaves us with that central theme that God is in control, and it's truly a fascinating book. So fascinating, in fact, that many critics question if Daniel was even real. And so they look at this and they say, not only is it highly doubtful that these prophetic visions could have been delivered and come to fruition like they did, but just the mere sense of one central character being involved in all of these different things. And so many, quote unquote scholars have questioned or posited, is this really a fictional character that they have ascribed all of these good things? Kind of like in American folklore, Paul Bunyan, right? Paul Bunyan was not real, but we give him all of this credit for all of these things. But we, of course, know better than that, because the rest of the Bible it provides evidence of the historical accuracy and of the fact that Daniel was, in fact, real. Yeah, so Jesus believed in him. I'll run through this list real quick just so that you guys have it. Ezekiel 14, God's message, the words that he provides Ezekiel refers to Daniel along with Noah and Job. Jesus himself references the book of Daniel in Matthew 21. Jesus names Daniel by name in Matthew 24 when he's talking about the impending destruction of Jerusalem. And he goes back to the message that is relayed to Daniel here that we're going to study in later parts here. We also see that parts of Daniel are written in first person, right? And so we know who wrote the book of Daniel. We can see that in Daniel 8 and chapter 15, where he says, I, Daniel, received this vision. Further parts of Daniel, this is very interesting. We're going to go through this in just a second here. There are parts of Daniel that are written in Aramaic, in the language of the Babylonians, the Chaldeans at that time. And so there's I believe, a bigger purpose for why that they are written in that. But part of those scriptures that are written in Aramaic are actually decrees by the king of Babylon that name Daniel in person in it. And so further evidence that Daniel was a real character, he did exist, and these things were attributed to him because they are written in the Babylonian text of it. And so while I agree with these critics or scholars that these stories are fascinating, I think they are absolutely real, and that Daniel himself was real. And so this is a great study that we're going to get into here over this course. One little piece of housekeeping that I wanted to make sure everybody knew about. If you miss a class or if you're ever interested in these materials, there are folders out on our website. Go to the member section of our website and you'll find a Bible class section with all of these materials for Daniel. And included in that is back when we were in the back classroom last quarter, between Jim, Jay, and myself, we recorded every class that we did. And so if for some reason you want to go back and listen to something, if you missed a class and want to make sure that you're able to follow along, you can go find those recordings and go listen along and make sure that you see that. And so yeah, absolutely. If you have trouble finding that, get with Jay, because I don't think Jim can help you much on that one. And I probably can't either, but Jay's your man. Okay, and so there's a deep piece of Daniel in this history. And so with that, you see 70 years of very critical history for the nation of Israel. And again, as we laid out, Daniel itself is not written in a chronological order. Instead, there's a literary agent that is at play here. And so really what this is this is a technique called a chiasmus. And that comes from the Greek word meaning a crossing or an X. And the intent of it, again, I'm not a literary expert. You can go talk with Debbie Boyd. She would know a whole lot more about this than I would. But I found this graphic and I thought this was extremely helpful to draw this point out, is this is a literary element that really draws you to a central theme in a way. And so what we see here is there's really two sets of groupings in the book of Daniel. The first half is chapter 2 through 7, and you can see the parallel structure. Hopefully you can see that from the slide. But it starts and ends with these with these visions of four worldly empires. And so that's how we kind of set the table and end the table, and that's the most important part of that grouping, right? All of these things revolve around how these four empires are going to play out. That middle section then is followed by trials and tribulations by God's faithful. And you think of the fiery furnace that we read about first, and then that's paired with, on the back end, Daniel in the lion's den. Now, those events happened over a time period of probably, 55, 60 years. But they're grouped like that so that we see that parallel structure in that message. And then those peak in the middle there with these stories about the kings of Babylon themselves. Nebuchadnezzar in the first one, his successor, Belshazzar, who's likely his grandson, or at least down the line of kings after Nebuchadnezzar had died. And in those two groupings, what you see is that both of those kings had lifted themselves up in their pride of what they had achieved, only for God to provide humility back on them. Now, interestingly, as we work through this, you can see similarities and contrasts between these groupings. And so as we get into this study, we'll go into more of those details, especially as we talk through those two events themselves. But what you see there is that peak in, if you lift yourself up, or as these worldly leaders lift themselves up, it is God's reminder of who is really in control. And in chapter 4, it repeats the same theme 3 times, that God appoints whom he wants, and that God is ultimately in control. And so that is there for our context. Now, if you flip forward into that next grouping, what you really see there is a grouping of prophetic visions about future events from Daniel's time period. And so all of those are driven again around what God is going to bring about, with the peak there being a little bit of a different structure in that one, but with the peak there being a message about the anointed one, or the Messiah, and that he will be cut off. And so we, of course, know through hindsight and the ability to piece the entire Bible together, we see how that comes to fruition and how that plays out with Christ. But here in Daniel, with this prophetic vision and this kind of lead, or this peak point, being a focus around what God is going to accomplish through that anointed one. And so then the final piece of this, and it's hard to see, but you can see a little bit there that we skipped chapter 1 and the back part of chapter 12. And the interesting piece from a literary perspective again is that chapter 1 begins with a military siege and the destruction of the temple. And the end of the book starts referencing another military siege and ultimately destruction of the chosen people of Israel. And it doesn't exactly point to what, it doesn't provide full clarity directly within Daniel. But one of the things that we're going to talk through in the course of this Bible study is, if you use these same visions, these same messages, and look at how John describes these in Revelation, we can see further clarity. We can see further conclusion of these. And so there's a strong case to be made that siege and destruction of the temple is correlating to Rome and what they accomplish in the first century. And so again, we'll go through more of this as we go. I at least find this helpful, hopefully you do too, to see the 30,000 foot view as we start. And if you can see the grand message of it, then once we drill into each of these, I find it at least easier, better to truly understand and appreciate what we're seeing within each of those stories, within each of those chapters. One other little note here, and then we're going to get into the text, is, and I referenced it earlier, Daniel is written in 2 languages. And so you can see the difference in the colors there. Chapters 2 through 7 are written in Aramaic. And so if we look at those messages again, that whole key theme is on God is in control, regardless of these 4 worldly empires jockeying for position throughout times to come even. It's God in control, but it's written in a language that's common to all people. Whereas the rest of the book is prophetic visions about God's ultimate plan that he's carrying out through the Jewish nation, and those are written in Hebrew. And so there is a distinction in audience, if you will, between these sections. And so part of that is, I think, well, not part of it, I think that is obviously very intentional at what God is trying to instruct and inform, and ultimately the message that he leaves here. So with that is the 30,000 foot view, and next we're gonna start drilling into the actual text of this here. And so if you would turn to Daniel chapter 1. I had to bring my glasses with me this morning, being the way that this is set up. But we'll start reading in verse 1 here. And stop a couple of times, and I will appreciate all and any feedback and questions and make this class as interactive as possible. But Daniel chapter 1, we see here in the third year of the reign of Jehoiakim, king of Judah, Nebuchadnezzar, king of Babylon, came to Jerusalem and besieged it. And the Lord gave Jehoiakim, king of Judah, into his hand with some of the vessels of the house of God. And he brought them to the land of Shinar, to the house of his God, and placed the vessels in the treasury of his God. And so what's happening here? What's the backstory?
Well, as we said in our history class, Nebuchadnezzar's father has died.
Yes.
And he's chasing the Egyptians down, they're retreating back into Egypt. He gets word his father's died. He stops, goes back to Babylon, and takes prisoners on the way. War movie.
Yeah, it's a war movie. If you heard Jim, what we saw in the previous 2 classes here, and in the history buildup of it and background, is this is a pivotal moment in the world history, right? Jerusalem here finds itself in between 2 superpowers. You obviously had Assyria that came and took the northern kingdom captive some 100 years before this time period. But in the days of King Hezekiah, remember King Hezekiah, Assyria comes to the wall. Hezekiah prays to God and says, look at how they're desecrating your name. And God sends an angel to kill 185,000 Assyrians and sends Assyria fleeing. He saves Jerusalem at that time. Now, some 100 years later, Assyria has succumbed to Babylon. You can kind of see it in the green map up to the top right of that. Babylon has come up, captured Assyria, and meanwhile, Egypt sees its time on its world stage. And so it comes up from the south, comes through Jerusalem, and they meet at Carchemish in a battle of world supremacy here. And so Babylon wins that, and Nebuchadnezzar as the general, his father is the king. And so Nebuchadnezzar then is pursuing Egypt as they retreat, or pursuing Pharaoh as he retreats back into Egypt. And then all of a sudden, Nebuchadnezzar hears that his father has died. And so he makes a beeline back to Babylon. Why? Why is that important? Why would he want to do that? Okay, protects the kingdom, and really I would suggest his rightful place as the leader of that kingdom, right? In turbulent times, in a vacuum of power, he wants to make sure that that is him that fills that and nobody else. And so what you see then is that, let me see, there's some highlights there. Oh, I guess not. what you see then is that Nebuchadnezzar makes this beeline back to Babylon to assume the throne. He does it in 23 days, which is, he was moving. He was moving very fast, as Jim had mentioned in our last class. And so with him on the way back, though, he wants to show off the strength that he has demonstrated here. And so he takes not only some of the Jewish articles from the temple, but he also takes people. And so now here we enter Daniel. And so Daniel is part of that group of people that is taken along with Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, or Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah, their Hebrew names. And so now the table is set of why Daniel is in Babylon. Yeah, absolutely. So what then do we know about Daniel, even from just these first couple of verses?
Considered almost perfect.
Okay, yeah, he's considered almost perfect. Nebuchadnezzar wants these people for what reason? Why did he select those that he took with him?
For teaching.
For teaching, okay. And so,
He's going to present them in Babylon. Just look what I've captured and brought back. I brought back royalty.
yeah, he brings back royalty. That's the key there, right? So if nothing else, if we don't even drill in further of what we see and can draw conclusions on Daniel, he's royalty, right? He's part of the noble class. And so he's this prized possession for Nebuchadnezzar. And so what a way to start as a young man. I can't even really imagine. We don't know exactly how old Daniel was, but he was probably, I don't know, what would you say, Jim? Teens, late teens? 15-ish, right. So imagine, how old is Dylan now? 14, 15, probably 15. Imagine a Dylan Keller being taken away 900 miles across away from home and presented to the worldly king as a prized possession, and just how terrifying that would be. And so here these young men, Daniel included, find themselves there. So let's pick up in verse 3. Then the king commanded Ashpenaz, his chief eunuch, to bring some of the people of Israel, both of the royal family and of the nobility, youths without blemish, of good appearance, and skillful in all wisdom, endowed with knowledge, understanding, learning, and competent to stand in the king's palace, and to teach them the literature and language of the Chaldeans. The king assigned them a daily portion of the food that the king ate, and of the wine that he drank. And they were to be educated for 3 years, and at the end of that time, they were to stand before the king. And so again, we see Daniel here as part of that noble class, but what do we also see of him? What other conclusions can we draw? Yeah. Right. Right. I like to think that, that's why my mom named me Daniel, is, she knew I'd be smart and handsome and capable. But no, but we obviously see that in Daniel. He is wise, he is capable, he is someone whom the king sees of benefit to himself, serving in this. So,
They didn't take lower class back.
yeah.
They took the upper class, our royal family, and they were muted, they were educated, and
Right.
they took the best of the best and they were that.
Right. And kind of interesting too, right? Because we've seen through maybe more modern kingdoms when they conquer, typically that noble class, they find themselves, on the wrong end of the execution standard, or imprisoned or jailed. And so here Babylon, though, is at least taking this grouping of those noble class and putting them towards service for the broader benefit of the king of Babylon. Yeah. Key insight. Yeah. Absolutely. Now we are obviously the spoiler alert is that is how God uses Daniel, right? And so Daniel is called upon time and time again throughout this 70-year period to provide wisdom and insight when no one else can. And obviously that's God's hand at work, but we see that come to fruition. So this is interesting. Isaiah 39, this was written 100 years before. Exactly what has happened was foretold, right? Isaiah told to Hezekiah, hear the word of the Lord of hosts. Behold, the days are coming when all that is in your house and that which your fathers have stored up till this day shall be carried to Babylon. Nothing shall be left, says the Lord, and some of your own sons who will come from you, whom you will father, shall be taken away, and they shall be eunuchs in the palace of the king of Babylon. And so if you take nothing else away from that, I would understand from this that God had purposes and plans in place already for what he was going to do through the stories that we're going to read. Okay, let's pick back up in verse 6. Among these were Daniel, Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah of the tribe of Judah. And the chief of eunuchs gave them names. Daniel he called Belshazzar. Hananiah he called Shadrach. Mishael he called Meshach. And Azariah he called Abednego. And so what is in a name? Why the change of names here? Okay, yeah. So a new identity, a wiping of identity. And I think that's the core theme here, right? Is if you look at these superpowers at play, put yourself in these four young men's shoes, and here they are with their whole identity being wiped away. Okay, exactly. You are no longer a Jew, you are a Babylonian. Oh, hang on. There we go. And so, let me just get all of them up there. And so Daniel, in Hebrew, means God is my judge. Now, the funny thing is my mom, I've learned, has lied to me my whole life. Because my mom has always told me that Daniel, which she named me, means God is my deliverer. And I think we see that obviously in the stories. We see God deliver Daniel. But the reason she always told me that is when she went into labor, they rushed to the hospital. The doctor on call was a man named Dr. Lord. And so she's always laughed at the fact that the Lord, Dr. Lord, delivered me. But it's all a lie, so it's all a lie. But no, what Daniel really means is God is my judge in Hebrew. And so as you see this push and pull of identity and this changing of identity, now what you see with Belshazzar is it means favored by Bel. Bel or Marduk is the Babylonian main king. And so where is your allegiance, right? This is an identity, is where is your allegiance? Hananiah means beloved by the Lord, while Shadrach, his new name, means illuminated by Rak, who is the sun god. And Mishael, which means who is like God, this appeal of the goodness of God there, is changed to Meshach, which is who is Shak, which was the god of fertility, or some have said it's whatever Aku commands, which was one of their other gods. Azariah turns to Abednego, which was the Lord of my help was Azariah, and now Abednego is servant of Nebo, the god of fire. And so as we look at that, what do you see at play? What is the king of Babylon, by changing these names, trying to infuse with these young men? Yeah, that's right. Yeah, they are no longer followers of God. They are to be followers of these idolatrous gods. And so imagine that pressure that these men face, that their everyday being now is being changed. Their very identity is being changed.
Dan, I didn't really think about it last word, but I would just encourage all of you, as we're going through this class, just go back and think about their Hebrew names as we're going through.
Yeah.
I mean, it's very clear, we see God doing each of those things, rhetorically
Right.
answering some of those questions.
Yeah, and I think also we do a little bit of a disjustice to Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah by calling them their Babylonian names to this date. Maybe Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego kind of come off the tongue a little bit better. But we have typically always used Daniel, the Hebrew name, not Belshazzar. And meanwhile, we flip that for the other three. But I think that's maybe a little bit of a disservice to those men there. Yeah, exactly.
And I'm sorry, Dan, you may have gone through this in previous classes, but their names, I'm just asking this question because I don't know. Their names seem to think that they're the first ones dedicated to the Lord or that they come from trying to Levi. Did you guys go over any of that?
Yeah, so they're definitely from the noble class, right? They're from likely the king's lineage. And so they may not be from the Levitical side, but they would be from Judah, right? And so, but they very well likely could have been those firstborns and dedicated for further service or have other honors bestowed upon them. All we really know is what we've read in the text here, is that they come from that noble class, that they were wise and capable men, and here they are trying to be, essentially persuaded or changed on who their allegiance has been towards now where they live and the circumstances they find themselves in. But that's a good point. And so all of this leads into verse 8, right? And we see this great resolution from Daniel. But imagine the pressures that we've talked about now as we read this. Verse 8 says, "But Daniel resolved that he would not defile himself." I think there's other versions that say he purposed in his heart that he would not. So he had this conviction that despite being, pulled apart here and being changed, Daniel has this conviction and resolution. And so he resolved that he would not defile himself with the king's food or with the wine that he drank. Therefore he asked the chief of eunuchs to allow him not to defile himself. And God gave Daniel favor and compassion in the sight of the chief of eunuchs. And the chief of eunuchs said to Daniel, "I fear my lord the king, who assigned your food and your drink, for why should he see that you are in worse condition than the youths who are of your own age? So you would endanger my head with the king." Then Daniel said to the steward, whom the chief of eunuchs had assigned over Daniel, Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah, "Test your servants for 10 days. Let us be given vegetables to eat and water to drink. Then let our appearance and the appearance of the youths who eat the king's food be observed by you, and deal with your servants according to what you see." So he listened to them in this matter and tested them for 10 days. At the end of 10 days, it was seen that they were better in appearance, fatter in flesh than all the youths who ate the king's food. So the steward took away their food and the wine they were to drink and gave them vegetables. And so what do we see from this? What further qualities do we see out of Daniel in this section?
His faithfulness in the God he served.
All right. So right from the very beginning, we see Daniel's deep faith and conviction in the God he serves. What else? Brave. Yeah. He is certainly brave to try to carry this out and make sure that he can find a way to continue serving his God, not defile himself as it says here. And so he is brave to go up against this, knowing that if it doesn't work, the punishment would be likely very severe. Okay, what else? What else do we see in Daniel?
You see the wisdom in allowing the chief an opportunity to test without
Yeah.
just saying no or yes. Gives him an out.
Yeah.
Gives him an option.
He was respectful, constable. He was respectful.
Right.
Authority.
Yeah. Yes, sir. Daryl. Clear-headed. Yeah, absolutely. All of that combined, right? You see the wisdom of Daniel. You see this ability to think on his feet and create a situation that's frankly a win-win, right? And that takes a lot of. We're already seeing that wisdom and some of those qualities come out. Yeah.
I was going to mention it's an attempt to maintain
Yeah.
what as much of it as possible.
Right. Yeah. 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 So if you didn't hear that, the whole pretense of any of this is this allows Daniel to keep God's law, right? And so while there's a systematic piece here designed to tear away those components of God's law, Daniel is finding a way to maintain that and keep himself pure, or at least dedicated towards God. And you certainly see conviction, that's right. Okay, what else? Anything else? Any other qualities that you see out of Daniel here? Okay. Yeah. Yeah, yeah. He's defying this pressure to conform towards this other system, and it's interesting because you said in the right way. You can also argue that you see humility in Daniel here too. So he takes a firm stand, but he does so in a way that we'd already mentioned. It creates a win-win, or it creates an avenue that he can carry this out. Yeah, a respectful defiance. I think that's good. The only other one that I have on my list here that I don't think we have mentioned fully is we see this perseverance, right? He doesn't give up when he's told no. And maybe that is part of that defiance and the way that he does this here. But we see this perseverance in that he's going to find a way, and he's trusting in God that God will deliver it. Yeah. I think that's absolutely true. That was actually going to be my ending question here is how do we do the same for our youth? So if we have time, we'll hopefully get to discuss that a little bit further. But verse 17, so as for these 4 youths, God gave them learning and skill in all literature and wisdom, and Daniel had understanding in all visions and dreams. At the end of the time, when the king had commanded that they should be brought in, the chief of eunuchs brought them in before Nebuchadnezzar. And the king spoke with them, and among all of them none was found like Daniel, Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah. Therefore they stood before the king, and in every matter of wisdom and understanding about which the king inquired of them, he found them 10 times better than all the magicians and enchanters that were in all his kingdom. And Daniel was there until the first year of King Cyrus. And so obviously this pans out for Daniel, but why? Maybe that's a little bit of a leading question, but
Back up just a minute. Just think about you've been taken captive, you've been brought into this amazing city of Babylon, and now
Yeah.
you're sitting at the feet of these Babylonian magicians
right?
and being trained in their sorcery, their
Yeah.
and all those skills.
Right.
Sitting there, having to endure that, and all the time he remains, keeps his faith in God.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. I mean, there's incredible pressures he would have gone through. So no, that's a great point. And at 15, yeah, a young man. Yeah. Yeah. So, yeah.
These verses here, is this the passage of the 3 years or the passage?
That's the way I read it. Yeah, I read that as the completion of the 3 years, but I suppose you could make an argument that it's some other time period. The 10 day. I think the 10 days kind of already would have transpired. But Wally, were you going to say something?
I was just going to say they're like 3 years older.
Right.
Well, if you go to chapter 2 and verse 1, it talks about the second year of Nebuchadnezzar.
You're right.
So we don't know if he was a quick learner or it was a little, it's a little bit confusing.
Yeah.
You know, the next segment of the story, it's only the second year of Nebuchadnezzar.
Right, right, and again, that's a great example of kind of the challenges you may have reading this book if you're thinking like most of us in the terms of chronologically these things happen in this order, because that's really not how this book is compiled from a chronological standpoint. Doug. Yeah.
Young men that they're put on stage and they're performing. So that to me is what stands out about these guys.
Yeah.
Allows them to be elevated ultimately.
Yeah, absolutely. So I think my question was why, or Whitney, go ahead if you got some. Right.
They didn't
Right. Yeah, absolutely. So why, right? Like, there's maybe a surface level answer to that, but I think there's a deeper level answer to that as well. You know, that they were given all of these things, and the text gives it out there clearly for us. We underlined it on this slide. God did it, right? And so we are already seeing in chapter 1 this theme, and it's going to be carried through every chapter of this book. Who is truly in control? And we of course know it's God. But when you're really looking at this, that surface level, why were they put in this position? Why were they blessed? Why were they, 10 times greater than any of the others? It's obviously because God's hand was at work and God had a purpose in this. And so then if you start maybe peeling that onion back, and we're going to see some of this again throughout the course of this study, but why, think about the benefit of these stories to other Jewish exiles spread throughout Babylon. One of the things that we learn from the historical side is that as, there's 3 waves essentially from the siege of Jerusalem itself, in which it took the southern nation into captivity. The northern kingdom had already been taken through Assyria, but they weren't all congregated in one area. They were spread throughout the entire empire. And so I think one of the pieces that we can highlight in this is think of the encouragement that all of the rest of the exiles would get as these stories of Daniel or Hananiah, Azariah come up. And think about that encouragement and that hope that they then would feel as well. Again, if you put yourselves in their shoes, here they have been completely devastated, conquered, ripped away from home, new identities, new culture, new pressures put on them. And for the charge to remain faithful and trust in God, that would be incredibly difficult. And so I think one of the underlying pieces of this that we can see is just the hope and encouragement that these stories about who truly is in control would have on all of those exiles as they live their daily lives. Okay, so with just a couple minutes left in class, Jim had hinted on this, and I think this is a great question that I battle with, and so I want you all to teach me. My kids are young, but I look at this and I see the next generation here is being propped up and being put in a place to have a huge impact for God's ultimate purpose and plan. And we see these qualities in Daniel and his 3 friends. And so how do we prepare the young generation, the next generation today to be in a position to have, dare I say, equal impact or at least, commiserate impact for God's kingdom? So how do we do that? How do we prepare the next generation?
Eat more vegetables.
There's probably some truth in that, isn't there? Eat more vegetables.
I go back to the parents.
Yeah.
We talked about Wednesday night, the events that unfolded. All these events that led to their deportation, they didn't happen overnight.
Right.
And his parents and grandparents had to be faithful, they had to be brave, and he demonstrated that to them
Yeah.
in their lives, leading up to that event. And I think it took.
Yeah.
They understood how you were supposed to behave.
Yeah. Daryl. Mm-hmm. Sure. Yeah. Yeah. Aspiration paired with godliness. We're out of time. I will open with that question Wednesday night. We're gonna dive into chapter 2 on Wednesday night and next Sunday. But we'll open with that question. So think about that, and if you have insight that you can share and teach me, I would love that as we look at that. Appreciate it.